This is kind of a weird what if, and not because it's not an easy one to think of. I mean, at the end of Goblet of Fire, Voldemort's plans fail because Harry survives and then immediately tells the last two people who Voldemort wants to know he's back. Luckily for him, though, Fudge doesn't want to believe that he's back, and because the evidence isn't concrete enough from the outside, he can just deny it and think that Dumbledore must be wanting more power. So it's only natural to wonder, what would happen if Voldemort wasn't able to hide, especially at a time when he doesn't even have all of his Death Eaters out of Azkaban. And the reason why I think this is a weirder or harder what if is because of Fudge himself. Because he has to change a lot as a character for this to be able to happen, because while he is firmly anti Voldemort, he's at least adjacent to the beliefs that his supporters have. And I specify his supporters here because if you've watched my channel before, you know that I don't think that Voldemort cares about the purity of blood, that the only motivations that he has are his need to be superior to everyone and his fear of death. So while his supporters want to use violence and the dark arts to create this new world order where muggles are subservient to purebloods, I think that Voldemort just wants to have everybody be subservient to him, and this is just the way for him to do it. And while Fudge would never force this world order or fight with the Death Eaters, we do know that he does put importance on the purity of blood because Dumbledore calls him out on it at the end of Goblet of Fire. "You are blinded," said Dumbledore, his voice rising now, the aura of power around him palpable, his eyes blazing once more. Oh, I guess he's speaking calmly here. "By the love of the office you hold, Cornelius. You place too much importance, and you always have done, on the so-called purity of blood. You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." So while Fudge would never work with Voldemort or even stand aside so that he can take over, we do know that he has a weakness for the perks of his position. He doesn't want to be a Death Eater like Lucius Malfoy, but he does want to be close with him because he has a lot of gold and he's able to help him with his job. So even if he does see any red flags, he doesn't want to see them because he wants to take advantage of having that connection with Lucius. So our first real question is, what has to happen for Fudge to believe Harry? Because the first instinct might be to say, well, if Barty Crouch Jr. wasn't given the Dementor's kiss, then he could have given evidence to the fact that Voldemort was back, and it could have swayed Fudge and everybody else in the Ministry too. There are a couple problems with this, though, starting with the fact that Barty Crouch Jr. isn't going to willingly give up Voldemort's plan. He only does it because he's under Veritaserum, and, Fudge isn't going to be using Veritaserum. If he was willing to do that, he would have said something like, "Oh, well, see here, Dumbledore, we'll prove that Harry's lying, put him under Veritaserum," and Dumbledore would have just said, "Sure, okay, Harry, would you prefer to take it with tea?" Or, knowing Harry, he'd probably prefer a baked potato, but Fudge is scared that Harry will take the Veritaserum and it will prove that he thinks Voldemort's back. And all of this assumes that Fudge doesn't take a Dementor with him to interrogate Barty Crouch Jr. because he thinks he can control the Dementors, because he's an idiot.
I am too smart. S-M-R-T. I mean S-M-A-R-T.
So the only way that I could see Fudge believing Harry about Voldemort being back is if Dumbledore insists on going in with him to interrogate Barty Crouch Jr., and that he's still under the effects of Veritaserum, but even then, I don't think that makes it a done deal. I think that just makes it a decent start. And for it to continue to have an effect on Fudge, I don't think that Harry can be in the room at all, because Harry is very emotional right now. Rightly so, for obvious reasons, but having Fudge yelled at by a teenager isn't going to help him believe that Voldemort's back, especially once Harry names Lucius Malfoy as a Death Eater. Once Harry mentions Malfoy, that's when he loses Fudge, because Fudge wants to continue to have that relationship with Lucius because he's going to be able to get a lot of money from him, and, the two of them have been working together for a while. He's naturally wanting to defend somebody he sees as a friend, even though he's totally wrong to think that, but that's a different video altogether right there. But I think for the best case scenario, we're looking at Dumbledore, Snape, and Fudge kind of talking by themselves, where it's less of an emotional discussion, more of a logical one, where Dumbledore is just kind of mapping out the whole year for it, from Bertha Jorkin's disappearance to Harry's name being in the Goblet of Fire to Barty Sr.'s murder, and then for Barty Crouch Jr.'s escape from prison, leading to Harry disappearing and Cedric's death, Karkaroff's fleeing, and Snape's dark mark appearing much more prominently. I don't think it's a guarantee that Fudge will believe it, but when you kind of lay it out like that, I think that's the best case scenario to lay it out for Fudge to actually believe Voldemort's back. So let's say that's our scenario. What happens next? Because it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. I do think Fudge is still going to be an obstacle, and that's because he doesn't like any of Dumbledore's ideas for reasons beyond, oh, Voldemort can't be back. He thinks he can control the Dementors. He has his own problems with the Giants and thinks it'll hurt him politically to send wizards to them to try to make peace. And he may be willing to go after some of the Death Eaters, but like I said, he's probably going to try to defend Lucius Malfoy, and once Malfoy is getting wind that the Ministry is targeting Death Eaters, he's going to be going to Fudge and saying, oh, Crabbe's not a Death Eater, Goyle's not a Death Eater, Knott's not a Death Eater, and then Fudge is going to have to pick a side here. But we do get no Umbridge at Hogwarts. Before you get too excited, though, let's remember that Dumbledore does allow for Fudge to pick his Defense Against the Dark Arts professor this year, because he has a lesson for Harry in mind. So what's lost if Dumbledore is the one who's picking the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher this year? What Harry ends up learning this year because of Umbridge is that he can't trust even the Ministry with his fight against Voldemort, that it's gotta be him. Because at the end of the day, he's the one who has to willingly walk into the Forbidden Forest and face death. And he can't let anybody else do it. It has to be him. So if Dumbledore isn't really able to achieve that goal the same way, because Umbridge does help him with that, I hate saying that sentence out loud, but what is Dumbledore going to try to do next to try to teach Harry that lesson? The problem for Dumbledore, though, is as soon as he's picking the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Harry doesn't have the same need to stand up against the system, because the system seems to be working, kind of. Fudge believes that Voldemort's back, Dumbledore's still in control, and he's not having to stand up to somebody like Umbridge, so he could try to look at the Order of the Phoenix, see if there's somebody there who could represent what the Ministry can do and why they can't be trusted. You have people like Lupin and Sirius who can do that, but it's not as effective as a first-hand experience that Harry gets with Umbridge. So if he can't really achieve his main goal, then I think Dumbledore would kind of look to achieve another one. So I think the question we have to ask is, what is he next focused on?
Pretty obvious.
Yes, the Horcruxes, which means that he would be trying to bring in Slughorn a year earlier. And with Voldemort being back, widely being reported now, I do think that Slughorn would still want the protection for it and would be willing to come back and be the potions teacher once again. Which means that Snape is going to be teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts, which I'm sure would annoy Harry enough into maybe rebelling a little more, but it's not rebelling against the Ministry, it's not rebelling against the system, it's just rebelling against Snape. So I think this is still one of those where, Dumbledore is more focused on the Horcruxes here. If Harry can learn this lesson, it would be from Snape, but at the same time, Snape is a great teacher when he wants to be. He just never really wants to be in the series, at least to the Gryffindors that we see. So I don't think that this is like an ideal scenario, but again, Dumbledore is more focused on the Horcruxes, so he wants to get Slughorn to be the one teaching so that he can learn just how many of them Voldemort made. So now that all that's set up, what happens this year? Because with no conflict from the Ministry, Dumbledore's not getting sacked, Harry doesn't have to worry about the threat of expulsion, and McGonagall's not going to get attacked by the Aurors. But we do have to remember that Dumbledore isn't talking to Harry this year because he's afraid of the connection that him and Voldemort have. So even though he believes that Harry might be the key to learning how many Horcruxes Voldemort made from Slughorn, I don't think he gives Harry the assignment here. And if it's not Harry who's learning this, I mean, how's he going to learn just how many Horcruxes there are? And also, how annoyed is Harry going to be that, oh, we brought in Slughorn, but Dumbledore's not going to tell him why, and, especially because Snape is the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Harry's going to be very annoyed the whole year. And for those of you who would say, well, Harry wouldn't be as annoyed this year because the Ministry's saying he's right, I mean, yeah, he's right about Voldemort being back, so woo? So I still think that Harry spends the whole year just mad at everyone except for Sirius, which then affects the end of the year because when he gets his visions of Sirius being tortured by Voldemort, I don't think he would go to Dumbledore with them, or even McGonagall for that matter. Also, this time, Harry can just use the Gryffindor fireplace to learn if Sirius is still at Grimmauld Place, but just like before, I think Creature would lie to him and say, hey, he went to the Ministry just so that he could trick Harry into going there. So the question then kind of becomes like how they get there. I do still think that he wants Ron and Hermione coming with him. I think that, by random chance, he'd probably come across Ginny and Luna, but I don't know if Neville would really be a part of it because he's more there because he was dragged to the battle by the Inquisitors, or, not really the battle, but you know what I mean with that one. So I think they are short Neville, and also I don't think he gets the mirror from Sirius in this timeline either. So even if you're saying, well, hey, he could check the mirror, one, he doesn't think to, and two, there isn't really a reason for Sirius to give him the mirror here, which could be a very big factor later in the series. But there's still the matter of how they get to the Ministry of Magic from Hogwarts.
We fly, of course.
Well, the Thestrals, of course. We know Luna's going to come up with that, but here's the problem with that idea, though. Dumbledore is still at Hogwarts, and he knows everything that goes on in its grounds. So as soon as Harry and the others are going for the Thestrals, he's going to realize what they're trying to do, and he's going to put a stop to it, which Harry's going to be even more annoyed by, but, Dumbledore isn't going to care that he's just annoyed. He's just wanting to protect Harry and protect the prophecy, but I think this is the point where Voldemort finally realizes, oh, Dumbledore is stopping this, and then possesses Harry while he's at Hogwarts while Voldemort is, I guess he's kind of at the Ministry at this point. It's kind of weird to think about what Voldemort's plan was in Order of the Phoenix, but I do think that he possesses Harry from here until he can no longer be in contact with Harry's soul because of just how much excruciating pain he's in. So once again, Dumbledore learns that Voldemort is unable to possess Harry's soul because it is too pure for him, and this then leads to the question of what about the prophecy? Because the Death Eaters are still in the Ministry of Magic, along with Voldemort being quickly able to get there, so after failing to defeat Harry again, I do think that he goes into the Ministry and gets his hands on the prophecy.
Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh no! Oh yeah!
But here's the catch with the prophecy. Doesn't matter if Voldemort gets his hands on it because he's already marked Harry as his equal. There's nothing he can do to change that. And also the prophecy doesn't speak of the Dark Lord definitively falling. It just speaks of the one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord. So Voldemort can't really do anything with this information, so I think he just falls back to his usual plans because he he always has the same plan A, B, and C for every situation. But there is one thing that I left out that would have happened a year earlier because Dumbledore isn't fighting the Ministry. So, with the extra time on his hands, he's able to work more things out, and I think finds his way to the Riddle Shack a year earlier. Which means that Dumbledore gets the curse on his hand a year earlier. So he has all these things that he has to plan and very few options for how he can actually do it, because he can't talk to Harry without risking Voldemort learning this information. And to make it even harder for him, he doesn't have an easy way to fake his death this year because Voldemort's focus is on the prophecy, not on eliminating Harry's protectors. So to sum it up, Dumbledore has to teach Harry about the Deathly Hallows, the Horcruxes, and he has to do it in a way that Voldemort will not find out about it. So what's the plan here? For starters, I think his will stays largely the same because that's how he tells Harry about the Deathly Hallows originally, and I can't think of any reason for that to change. The only risk would be if Voldemort is running the Ministry that they would try to steal the contents of Dumbledore's will, but I think he would see that coming and would have the Order of the Phoenix be the ones who would deliver the contents of his will to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. But the Horcruxes, that's a little bit harder, partially because he can't tell Harry about them until he learns that Voldemort cannot be in contact with his soul, which makes it harder for him to learn just how many there are from Slughorn, and, assuming that he finds the ring pretty quickly after Goblet of Fire, which it's Dumbledore, so I think that's a fair assumption, which means that he would be dying in some time of June or July of 1996. But Dumbledore has to know just how many Horcruxes there are, so I think because he's dying, he lays all of his cards out on the table for Slughorn, shows him the Horcruxes that he's destroyed, tells him that he doesn't care whatever role Slughorn played, just that they have to defeat Voldemort, and the only way that it can happen is if he shares this memory. And I do think that actually showing the Horcruxes to Slughorn would work, because originally, Dumbledore picks Harry to be the one to do it so that he can play to Slughorn's emotions, just to visibly show him the symbology of what's going on here. So I do think that if Dumbledore actually shows him the Horcruxes, that Slughorn would share the memory with Dumbledore. And as for how Dumbledore tells all this to Harry, I think his plan A is to have his portrait do it, so that he can still see that it's safe for Harry to know this information, but then once he learns that Voldemort is blocking Harry out of his mind, then I think he just quickly tells him all of this. He's got about 2 months to live after this, so I think he just rushes through all the lessons, which he does have all the information for, so there's no reason for it to take a whole school year for him to tell all of this to Harry. Now, for how Dumbledore dies. Well, the mission for Voldemort actually succeeds. He gets his hands on the prophecy, so there's no reason for him to assign Draco the task of assassinating Dumbledore to punish Lucius. Lucius hasn't failed here, but we also don't have a duel between Voldemort and Dumbledore where Dumbledore is just kind of brushing him aside almost. So Voldemort, I think, is overconfident enough to think, hey, I can take down Dumbledore. You know what? I'm finally just gonna go and kill him. It's time. And yes, I know that everybody always says, oh, Dumbledore was the only one that Voldemort ever feared, but I don't buy that. You can click on the card if you want to learn why. And this is where Dumbledore gets involved, because he still has his man on the inside, so I think that he has Snape suggest to Voldemort, hey, if for some reason, because Dumbledore is such a skilled wizard that he manages to survive, to escape, that Snape will be the one who will kill Dumbledore. And while Voldemort, I think, would not love this idea, thinking that, oh, one of my Death Eaters thinks that he's better qualified to kill Dumbledore than I am, I do think that he's smart enough to realize that Snape isn't doing it for that reason, and, at a certain point, having Snape as a spy isn't as valuable as not having Dumbledore around, so I do think that's Voldemort's plan here, and because Dumbledore is a very skilled wizard and the master of the Elder Wand, I do think that he survives the duel with Voldemort, so once again, Snape kills Dumbledore.
Oh, I haven't gotten to that part yet.
It's a 4-year-old book.
I'm a slow reader.
And with that, we get into year 6. Dumbledore is dead, the ring and the diary are the only Horcruxes that are destroyed, and the Ministry will soon be falling. It's pretty bleak. But hey, at least Sirius is still alive.
Harry.
But what about the locket? Well, Dumbledore has been spending the last year of his life learning as much as he can, so I do think that he still learns the location of it, and I do wonder how much of the original timeline says that, hey, it was a timing thing where he happened to learn about it, but he also needed Harry. But I don't know how much he needs Harry here, so he may have just found it by himself, though he also wouldn't have been able to get it by himself, so it's definitely possible that that's what happened. So I do think, though, in the 2-month period between Harry learning how to block Voldemort out of his mind, or more accurately, Voldemort just keeping Harry at an arm's length, and Dumbledore's death, I do think that the two of them would go to the cave, get the locket, and learn that it's a fake there placed by RAB. But let's talk about what happens when the Ministry falls, because it would once again happen quickly after Dumbledore's death. So Harry has to go on the run again, presumably with Ron and Hermione, but the big difference here is they're all underage, so they can't do any magic without being caught by the Ministry, so they need to find a way to have constant protection, so insert Remus Lupin and Sirius Black. Sirius is easy enough to explain. He always drops everything for Harry at a moment's notice, so I have no doubt that he would join them on the Horcrux hunt, and I don't even think he would have to know the full story to be willing to follow Harry to the ends of the earth. And it is good for the trio because they get somebody who has been living on the run for multiple years after his own escape from Azkaban, so he'll be able to help them with his experience too. And while Lupin would definitely want to join because of the importance of it, I do think the bigger reason he would join is because he's more of an avoidant person. You know, obviously he cares about Harry, but he doesn't have that same reputation for just dropping anything at a moment's notice for him. But at the same time, we do know that he spends all of Half-Blood Prince avoiding his feelings for Tonks, so I think that he would see this as an opportunity to get away from her, to protect her, and you know, obviously once he's actually there, of course he's going to want to learn more and may have some of his own struggles, but at the same time, I think having Sirius there would help him, and you know, it would prolong him staying with them and prevent him and Harry from butting heads too much. You know, Sirius being the one to say, hey, we're doing this for Harry, so we don't have to know, and while I think Lupin would struggle with it, I do think he would still stick with them. And while originally I don't think Harry would have allowed anyone else except for Ron and Hermione to join him on the Horcrux hunt, I do think because he didn't have Umbridge teaching him and he didn't learn that you can't trust anybody else, I do think that he would gladly have Sirius and Lupin join him because he hasn't learned it any other way, so he's still going to be looking for people to count on. And now for the actual hunt. Well, to start, having Sirius with them means that they learn who RAB is right away. You know, that's Sirius's brother. He's gonna recognize the initials, which means that they can also get Creature to come to them right away too, because 1, Sirius is still alive, Creature is still his house elf, and 2, Mundungus Fletcher hasn't stolen all of the Black family heirlooms, so it's not like they have to go hunt down Umbridge again in the Ministry and break into there to get to the locket. No, they just need to convince Creature to give it to them. But the thing is, Sirius can't give him an order to do it, and Creature wouldn't trust Sirius with it either. And the reason why he doesn't have to follow his orders is because he's following Regulus's orders, so he can choose to follow those orders, but then at the same time, I do think that Harry would still eventually be able to convince him, especially with Hermione's help, and he would probably say something to the effect of, hey, we didn't trust Creature before, and it nearly ended in our deaths, Sirius. he can be very important. So let's just make sure we're treating him with respect here because we have to defeat Voldemort. That's what's more important. So I do think Kreacher does eventually give them the locket. So that's a good thing, but they still have problems. They don't have a way to destroy the Horcrux, and I also think that eventually they have to make their way to Grimmauld Place because of the jinx on Voldemort's name, whether they realize it or not. So I do think that they find their way there, which could seem like a bad thing in the short term, but actually does help them because Snape can also get there. So I do think that Snape would then attack them so that he could get them the Sword of Gryffindor. You know, the instinct may be to say, oh, maybe he tries to kill Sirius and Lupin for it, but I don't think he would go that far. But he does still need to be defeated by Harry, so I think he could almost be losing to Harry in a duel here, making Harry the master of the Sword of Gryffindor and the Elder Wand, so that's a good thing. And I don't think he would even stoop to killing Sirius. Like, he hates Sirius, but I think there's pretty good evidence to say that Snape wouldn't even kill him. "That boy's soul is not yet so damaged," said Dumbledore. "I would not have it ripped apart on my account." "And my soul, Dumbledore? Mine?" So yeah, that's enough for me to say right there that Snape isn't going to be killing anybody else. And it does also mean that our group has to go on the run now as they're once again camping in the forests, but this time they have the Sword of Gryffindor and Harry's already master of the Elder Wand, so we do have some good things there, and I do also think it's a good thing that they have Sirius with them, again, having that experience of living on the run. I don't think they'll be as hungry, and also because they have the sword, they'll be able to destroy the Horcrux right away. I do think that Lupin in particular would struggle with it just because of his personality, and I think it would be able to prey on him being a werewolf and his feelings for Tonks. And good news also, Ron doesn't leave, but this is kind of where it starts to become more guesswork for it, because sure, they're probably going to be figuring things out similarly, but at the same time, Lupin may slow them down, Sirius may accelerate some things. I do think that Harry comes to a lot of the same conclusions that he otherwise would, and I do think that in his overconfidence, or maybe they just don't realize that there's a jinx on Voldemort's name, and I do think he ends up blurting it out, which then gets them sent to Malfoy Manor, where they eventually are learning that Bellatrix may have something in her vault in Gringotts, so they break into there, and then eventually to Hogwarts. There is one thing I left out of that, though, that I'm sure you're wondering if I'm coming back to, or if I just forgot about it, and that's the mirror. You know, obviously Harry doesn't have his piece for it, so how do they get out of Malfoy Manor? And I do still think it would be Dobby, but the difference here is, you know, it's because Sirius has the mirror, and you know, you can see some of my other videos, like how Dobby was working for Dumbledore the whole time, and that's why he's with Aberforth here, so I think that would still happen, and I think that because of that, Aberforth would go to Sirius and say, hey, this is what the plan is going to be. I have the other piece of the mirror now, you know, maybe Dung still steals some stuff or something. Maybe Albus decides to say, hey, I'm taking this other piece of the mirror, Sirius. I'm giving it to my brother in case something happens, and of course Sirius is going to agree to whatever Dumbledore says, so I do still think that Dobby gets them out of this situation because of the mirror. I just think the difference here is that Sirius is the one who's using it rather than Harry. Man, couldn't find a way to save Dobby in this one, could I? Still saved Sirius, though, but yeah, it's either Dobby or Harry, Ron, Hermione, Lupin, and Sirius, so sucks, but it's the only way I see it. And Voldemort would once again learn that his Horcruxes are being hunted because of the break-in at Gringotts, which would eventually lead to the Battle of Hogwarts. And yes, I do think Snape would be headmaster still at this point and would be removed the same way as well, so I do think that as we're getting this battle, Snape is only focused on getting this last memory to Harry, that he has to die, that he was the unintentional Horcrux, and I do think that Harry still makes those steps to die in the Forbidden Forest for all the people that he loves, inadvertently protecting them with the same love charm that saved him when he was a baby. You can click on the card here for that one too, but I do think that everything would play out the same with Harry coming back from death and then facing Voldemort one last time and being able to defeat him for good, as Tom Riddle will die. And at this point, I'm sure you're wondering, does anything really change with this story, or do I think that everything would just kind of play out the same, just everything pushed up a year? And to a certain point, yeah, Fudge isn't really that important of a character, not nearly as important as, say, Voldemort or Dumbledore, so his motives don't have the same impact on the greater story. I mean, Sirius and Lupin may both survive. It all kind of depends on what happens with, the jinx on Voldemort's name, if they can make it to Harry's 17th birthday, and what happens at the Battle of Hogwarts, of course, but I guess that also means that when Harry faces death and uses the Resurrection Stone right before it, he only sees his parents in the Forbidden Forest, which, man, Fudge really doesn't do anything.
You stink, loser!
But now I want to shift the question to you. Is there anything I left out that you think changes if Fudge believed Harry, or do you think it was just impossible that he never would have admitted that Voldemort was back without seeing him? Or we could talk about who you think would handle the Horcrux locket the best. With this 5, if I had to rank them, I'd probably say Sirius, Harry, Hermione, Ron, and then Lupin, but I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that as well. I also mentioned a couple other videos on my channel. You can click on them here if you want to learn how Dobby was Dumbledore's spy, or how Voldemort never actually feared Dumbledore, or you can just hit the subscribe button so you don't miss anything. But that's all I got for you guys today, so if you enjoyed, please drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.